So as many people know, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West are officially getting divorced. And from what it looks like, their divorce may actually end up being quicker than most. They apparently have already agreed to a bunch of terms, and they actually have a prenuptial agreement, also known as a prenup.
We want prenup. We want prenup. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone that they have a prenup, seeing as they were both millionaires before they even got married, but it is something to point out, as is the fact that you don't actually need to be a millionaire to benefit from a prenup. So in this video, we're going to do something just a little bit different and go over some of the costs and benefits of entering into a prenup. Some of them might surprise you. Coming up on Legal Bytes. Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Bytes. I'm Alyte, I'm a lawyer, and on this channel we explain the law one bite at a time. Okay, so before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about Patreon. We've had a Patreon account since we started the channel, but I haven't really felt particularly comfortable with pushing it, considering the fact that I always wanted to have the content come first. With this channel, I've always wanted to put most of my energy towards creating good content and towards connecting with viewers. And when we first started the Patreon account, initially I really wanted to add extra stuff on there to give an added value, but I found that it was something that we just couldn't quite keep up with yet. At some point, I'd love to be able to hire some people to take work off of my plate so that I can do stuff like that. But at the moment, doing one deep dive per week and a number of shorts is probably about the max that we can do with what we've got right now. So although I can't offer any extra content on Patreon right now, I wanted to revamp it a little bit so that I can offer it as an option in case anyone actually does want to support the channel. Truthfully, the videos that we put up on YouTube are a labor of love, and they do take a lot of time. And with that, we really appreciate all of the viewers and subscribers that tune in, especially the ones that are our regular viewers and regular commenters. And really, the last thing that I want is for anyone to take this as some sort of a weird sales pitch. Rather, I just thought that I would mention that it's there in case anyone is interested. If you're not in a position to support us on Patreon, or you just don't want to, but you still enjoy watching, that's okay too. We love having you here as a viewer and a subscriber. Anyway, back to the video. Okay, so obviously most people have some sort of an idea of what a prenup is. Most people think of prenups and they think of divorce. And that's because that's normally where a prenup comes up. But basically all a prenup really is it's a contract between you and your prospective spouse. And what that contract outlines is how things should be divided up in the event of a potential divorce. Most of the time people's concerns with prenups have to do with money, but they can include provisions about kids as well. But truthfully, not everyone needs one because sometimes the costs outweigh the benefits. So let's get into some of those costs and benefits. Okay, so we'll start with the costs and some of the reasons why people might not end up getting a prenup. And then of course we'll get into the benefits and reasons why people do end up getting prenups. So one of the first obvious costs is money that's spent up front. For most people, drafting up a prenup means hiring a lawyer, or actually two lawyers, one for each person. And that can be expensive for many people. So that's why some people will go through the task of drafting one themselves. However, of course, it is always recommended to have some sort of attorney take a look at it to make sure that it's enforceable and that your rights are actually adequately protected. Okay, so the second reason why someone might not get a prenup is because it can be considered a romance killer. I mean, it's true, it is kind of awkward to think about divorce when you're just getting into marriage. And most people are probably feeling so in love with their future spouse that they can't even contemplate the possibility of a divorce. But the truth is that for any marriage to sustain itself over a long period of time, it's going to need some balance of romance and reality. So if you think about it, by confronting the possibility that your marriage could end up, hypothetically speaking, in a divorce, you could end up making better decisions that could actually end up preventing that. Now, another reason why some people will stay away from prenups is because it feels really permanent to enter into this contract before you get into your marriage, especially considering the fact that that marriage is supposed to last the rest of your life. Well, there's something about prenups that's consistent with all contracts in general is that you can add language in there that allows you to modify the agreement at a later date, so long as both sides agree and probably in writing. You can even add in language that allows the both of you to revoke it entirely if you want to. Anyway, another potential cost of a prenup is that it can end up with an unbalanced situation between the two spouses. And this is where robust communication and a real sense of fairness and partnership should come in. At the same time, it's also potentially a reason to have an attorney represent you to make sure that your interests are actually protected. And finally, there's always the possibility that a prenup might just be entirely unnecessary. If neither spouse has any debts or assets to speak of, and they're living in a community property state, it might actually not really be necessary to have a prenup. And that's because a community property state has laws that differentiate between separate property and community property. Separate property is usually defined as any assets that you have before your marriage or that you received during your marriage through other avenues, such as an inheritance. And community property usually consists of your income that's received during the marriage. In community property states, usually separate property remains the separate property of each individual, and community property is what's put into a pool that gets divided in half. Of course, benefiting from those laws means continuing to live in those states. So if you live in a community property state but there's a possibility you could move later, a prenup may be a good idea. Okay, so now on to the benefits. So obviously the first benefit of a prenup that anyone can think of is the fact that it makes a divorce much smoother. And that's one of the benefits likely to be enjoyed by Kim and Kanye right now.
Prenup, yeah.
Admittedly, enjoyed is kind of a weird word for that, but you know what I mean. We've all heard of messy divorces, and I'm sure you've heard of divorces that started out amicably and that ended up getting a little more contentious as time went on. So having a legally enforceable prenup can help to minimize some of the arguments that are bound to come up along the way. But aside from that, one of the biggest benefits of a prenup is the communication that starts before it. Even if you don't end up entering into a prenup, it's helpful to talk about it. Why do you or your spouse want one? Why do you or your spouse not want one? What are your concerns? What are your fears that underline that reasoning? Addressing those fears and concerns before you get married can really help to set you up on some stable footing. Other questions include what do you value? What does your spouse value? Do one of you plan to take on more of an active role in child rearing? Are both of you planning to continue on headfirst with your careers? Do you even want kids in the first place? How do you plan to pay normal bills? How would that potentially be squared up down the road if you ended up in a divorce? All of those are conversation points that are worth having before you get married. And I mean, it's really not even necessarily a legal benefit, it's more of a relationship benefit. But there is kind of some overlap because that benefit in your relationship can end up helping your legal situation if you end up with a healthy marriage as opposed to one that crumbles in divorce. That's partly because it can help you organize how you want your whole relationship to be set up for the next number of decades, and how you want your finances to be set up. And that actually leads into the next benefit of a prenup, which is that it helps to outline your finances. In order for a prenup to be complete, there needs to be at the very end of it a schedule that includes all of your assets and all of your debts, and the same for your spouse. Now this is really useful because not only are you disclosing the financial picture to your spouse in total openness, but you also are able to take a look at your whole financial picture, which you may or may not have even looked at before, and find any potential blind spots or maybe some bad habits that need to be fixed. That can help with some level of introspection and potentially a conversation between the two of you as to what your financial goals actually are. And it certainly prevents the two of you from getting any sort of nasty surprises about each other's financial situations. I've seen it happen and it's not pretty. Trust me. Generally speaking, it's better to have those conversations before your nuptials. And the last few ways that you can benefit from a prenup is protecting yourself. You can use it to protect separate property, like family heirlooms, for example. You can also use it to protect your business interests. Maybe you're a small business owner and your spouse plays some sort of a role in that. Now, it's helpful to parse out, is that role worth a certain percentage interest in the company, or is it worth more of a nominal fee? Your expectations may be different from your prospective spouse's expectations on that. Getting that defined and written down on paper before you get married can be very helpful. And the third way it can protect you is from your prospective spouse's debt. Do they have a lot of credit card debt? Do they plan to go back to school and maybe take on some student loans? Who's expected to foot the bill? Whether things end up successfully or whether things go down south. Discussing all of that and reducing it to writing before you get married is generally a good idea. Anyway, I'm curious about people's thoughts on this. As a reminder, if you have one or you don't have one, I don't necessarily want to hear that in the comments because that could potentially be confidential information. But if you have thoughts on prenups, generally speaking or hypothetically speaking, I'd love to see it in the comments below. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video or at least found it informative, we'd love it if you'd hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you enjoy our content and you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. That way you can find out when our next video is uploaded. See you in the next video.